Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maricris Roco, and this afternoon I will be presenting my research entitled Locating Gender Stipulations in the Peace Agreement in Mindanao, Promoting Women's Rights and Gender Equality in Conflict Resolution. So, separatism has long haunted Mindanao and the Philippines in general since 1969, when the Moro National Liberation Front, or the MNLF, was formed as a separatist movement by Professor Nur Miswari. This was followed by numerous groups, which includes the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, by Hashim Salamat, which splits from MNLF in 1980. The Abu Sayyaf Group, ASG, and the Mangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, PIFF. The separatist sentiments includes fear of having religious, cultural, and political traditions weakened or destroyed by forced assimilation into a Christian majority. Muslims also felt resentment of migration of Christian population from Luzon, which made the Muslims a minority in some areas in Mindanao. And lastly, of course, there's also frustration over lack of economic development in Mindanao. The Philippines has engaged in peace talks since 1960s, or for almost 4 decades already, and it became the first Asian country to adopt the United Nations Resolution 1325 in 2000. This resolution highlights the disproportionate impact conflict has on women and men, and advocates for stronger inclusion of women in all areas of security. This resolution, of course, encourages women participation in sharing their voices, expertise, and experiences in all peace-building efforts. By adopting the UN SCR 1325, the peace panel, has included women in the table. In fact, the international community recognized women's participation and leadership in peace-building process in Mindanao, a successful example of this. Considering that women participation in the peace process in Mindanao is a success and lauded by the international community, this research will try to locate specific gender stipulation and pronouncements from the 1996 Jakarta Accord to the Bangsamoro Basic Law, or the Republic Act 11054. At the same time, we will try to analyze existing literature about the level of participation of women in peace building in Mindanao, from being part of the peace panels to civil societies or people organizations, and influencing meaningful changes in the lives of women in Mindanao. So the problem that we will try to answer, and we will try to find the solutions, will be guided by these questions. Are there any gender stipulations in the peace agreements and ultimately in the BBL? What is the participation of women in conflict resolution in Mindanao? And how is the government promoting women and gender equality in conflict resolution? Are there any framework, policies, or mechanisms in place to ensure that this is done? And lastly, was there any assessment on commitments on women's rights and inclusion on peace agreements? Okay. For the objectives, apart from, of course, locating gender-specific stipulations, we want to ascertain if peace agreements has promoted gender equality and women empowerment, and at the same time document the current economic status and political participation of women in Mindanao, and hopefully to look at opportunities and gaps where women can participate to build a more meaningful peace, especially for Bangsamoro. This study will be significant for the government, the new Bangsamoro Parliament, the national government, women, and ultimately the people in Mindanao, or any researchers with the same interest. It will bring greater understanding to the significance of women's inclusion in every aspect of peace building, and at the same time encourage women to be part of creating a gender equal society and having a realistic and sustainable peace in Mindanao. For the limitations, we will be limiting ourselves to the peace agreements from 1996 to the creation of PBL, and we will look at literatures that are accessible online, such as journals, news articles, databases, reports. Mainly, we will study secondary data. Okay. We are also limited due to the pandemic and the academic time frame. So extensive data analysis and collection on this one is still quite impossible as of this moment. So it would this research is still subject for improvement and hopefully further investigation in the future. So the review of related literature will be divided into one, providing the timeline of political situation in Mindanao. Then we will examine the gender stipulations in peace agreements and investigate the effects of this gender stipulation into the economic, social, and political participation of women in Mindanao. So just a brief overview of the political situation in Mindanao from 1969, when the MNLF was formed as a separatist movement by Professor Normis Wari. This was triggered by the 1968 Jabida massacre, where Tausug men and boys were recruited and being trained in Corridor, but unfortunately they were summarily executed. Um, Different legislative hearings, Senate hearings, Houses hearings has been done, but unfortunately, no one was formally charged with that. So that is not. It leaves a sour taste in the mouth of Moros. Okay. So in 1976, the Marcos administration and the MNLF signed the Tripoli Agreement. And in 1980, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front separates from MNLF. In 1987, Corazon Aquino, during the Corazon Aquino's administration, the Jeddah Accord was formalized. In 1990, the ARMM was established. The Ramos administration in 1996 finally was able to sign the final peace agreement, or the Jakarta Accord. The Aquino administration restarts the peace talks in 2010 with the MILF, and succeeding years has seen the establishment of the FAB, Framework Agreement on Bangsamoro, the CAB, Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, and when President Rodrigo Duterte was inaugurated in 2016 as the new president, a new roadmap for the resolution of Bangsamoro issue was announced until it was passed in 2018. So first, let's look at the 1996 final peace agreement between the GRP and MNLF, or what is famously known as the Jakarta Accord. This was signed between Ambassador Manuel Tian for the GRP and Professor Nur Miswari for the MNLF. It is an implementing structure which was divided into two phases. Phase one is establishing the Special Zone of Peace and Development, or the EZOPAD, which joins areas in ARMM, such as Zamboanga, Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, to name a few, and established the Southern Philippines Council for Peace and Development. So the goal of phase one is to make sure that peace and development efforts will be intensified in those areas, and that public and private investments will be channeled into the region to create an economic activity and improve the condition of the people in the area. Phase two, on the other hand, shall involve the amendment or repeal of the Organic Act for ARMM. So this will be eventually replaced by the BDL. In the 1996 Jakarta Accord, there are 154 clauses or sections. Unfortunately, there are only two that are gender specific. So one of which is on page 12, which is the new regional autonomous government. It encourages the participation of marginalized sector, including women. And on page 30, It says that the regional autonomous government in the area should advocate equal opportunity for all the inhabitants of the area of autonomy, regardless of ethnic origin, culture, sex, creed, and religion. A very general provision, but still, it's a very good gender stipulation, considering that it is advocating for equal treatment. On the 2012 Framework Agreement on the Bangsamoro or the FAB, um, let's look at very specific gender stipulations, such as basic rights. It says here the right of women. It talks about the right of women to be protected against violence and non-discrimination, and should encourage to participate in social and economic activity. And on page 14, on the normalization, and page 7 on gender and development, it requires the Bangsamoro government to set aside portion of the budget to be allocated for gender and development specific programs and women programs. On the governance on page 3 and page 4, it is encouraging different sectors, marginalized sectors such as women, to be part of the governance and the government structure. Another is on page 10, which requires consultation for marginalized sector, including women, and on page 8, the socio-economic development program for decommissioned women auxiliary forces of the MILF. So in this picture, you can see the signing of the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro between the GPH and MILF in 2014. It is good to note that on that panel, the GLP is represented by the chairperson, Miriam Coronel Ferrer, on the right side of your screen, and then two other women, namely Yasmin Busran Lao, the second, and Senonida Brosa as a panel consultant. And the last picture is Teresita Quintos Deles, the presidential advisor on the peace process when the agreement was signed. So a majority of women on the GLP peace panel for CAB were women. So let's look at the 2018 Bangsamoro Basic Law, or RA 11054. This is a milestone, considering that it has introduced a lot of gender-specific stipulations, such as providing and according every individual with freedom of choice. And it specifically put on Article 5, Section 2 that there should be development programs and laws for women, labor, the youth, the elderly, and differently abled and indigenous people. So on Article 7, Section 7 and Article 9, Section 4, this talks about reserved seats. So there should be reserved seats allotted for marginalized sectors, especially for women. We all know that political participation here in the Philippines, even in Luzon, is still not 50-50 or equal between men and women. So it is a very good provision to encourage women to be part of the assembly or for the Bangsamoro. On Article 9, Section 11, again, it reinforces the participation of women in the Bangsamoro government, namely being appointed to the Bangsamoro cabinet. And for the transition government, there are 16 women in the Bangsamoro government. There should also be a commission on women, and on Article 9, it requires that the Bangsamoro government should observe the provision on the CEDAW, or the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Article 13, Section 5 talks about setting aside 5% of the budget for gender and development activities, just like what we're doing or what the national government is requiring under the Magna Carta of Women. Okay. And so there are a lot of gender stipulations in the BBL, and it is a very good and positive result of women participating in peace process. But what is the importance really of having gender analysis or gender incorporating gender in conflict resolution? So according to Cynthia Cockburn, she argued that patriarchal societies characterized by unequal gender relations tend to relapse into conflicts because patriarchal gender relations that emphasize the dominant notions of masculinity is characterized by authority, coercion, and violence, and female subordination. And those are the causes of violence and oppression within a society. So, how is the government and other actors in conflict resolution promoting women and gender equality in Mindanao? So, one is through extensive coordination of the national government with different women organizations, civil societies, and people's organizations for the creation of the National Action Plan for Women, Peace, and Security. But it is to be noted that compared to other parts of the country, women organizations are quite less. Next. So women in BARM are actually not in a better position uh, as of now, just yet, because Mindanao still experience uneven development. Most of the areas within BARM have the lowest gross regional domestic product. Women poverty incidence among women in the region is still below the per capita poverty threshold. 11 out of the 20 poorest provinces in the country are found in the conflict-affected regions of ARMM, and Calabar. Um, they have the lowest levels of Human Development Index. In fact, what they have is just half of the national average of 7.747. Their life expectancy is also 20 years shorter. Their functional literacy is also lower. In peace and conflict studies, it is important to note that there is positive and negative peace. Negative peace is the absence of war, conflicts, and violence. However, positive peace refers not only to the absence of war, but also the absence of poverty, hunger, oppression, marginalization, and discrimination. If we would look at Mindanao or the Bangsamoro in that aspect, we can see that definitely they don't have negative and positive peace yet. So how can we assess if commitment on women's rights and inclusion result in impactful action? Um, we should make sure that peace building and actual long-term changes in gender equality, women's participation, and explicit commitment to women's rights need to be sustained throughout the entire peace process. Gender stipulations are not enough. Application and monitoring and verifying if these stipulations are done are also important part of it too. Okay, so national development plans are also important policy instrument for the advancement of the women, peace, and security agenda in post-war states. Men and women should hold inclusive attitudes and promote inclusive behaviors in peace and security. It's not enough that women are pushing for inclusivity. Men should also be ready to help women and bring them into the folds. Sustainable peace is impossible without women's security and equality. Countries where women are treated equally are definitely generally more secure. So as a conclusion of this study, number one, peace is not a product, but a process. It will be sustainable if actors deem it legitimate. And to make it legitimate, all sectors should be included in peace building. Definitely economic development should be felt by the people to fully commit into peace building. Women's organizations should be encouraged, should be um, consulted in whatever policy making in Bangsamoro. International organizations, aside from foreign aid and assistance, should serve as a monitoring team to make sure that both parties are held accountable. And again, women representation in the transition government, there are 16 women out of 98, encouraging, but still very far from what we're focusing or what is the goal, which is a 50-50 administration. Okay. And the Parliament of Barmen, the national government, should increase women's participation in the assembly and cabinet in the next years so that we can have more gender-specific uh, policies and change. International organizations should make sure that there are gender-specific provisions or requirement for their aid. And most importantly, there should be rebuilding of trust between the Christian, Muslims, and indigenous people, between the people and the government, the people and law enforcement agencies, between MILF, MNLF, the military, and other groups. There should be a renewed sense of responsibility in working together towards the success of Bangsamoro. It will take everyone, not just women, to push for a Bangsamoro that recognizes gender equality. Women will need the support of the government and vice versa if they wish to have a meaningful and sustainable peace. In Mindanao and in the Philippines in general, one, it is an environment suited for women participation, being the most gender equal country in Asia. And that should stay the same. That should not be a hinder for the Bangsamoro people, even if we have differences in culture and tradition. There are mechanisms and commissions in place, policies in place, international agreements in place that we can all use as a guide to make sure that women and a gender equal women should be safe and there would be a gender equal society in Bangsamoro. Again, there should be social, economic, political, and cultural transformation of if armed conflict is to be avoided, according to Herbal Science. Okay. So we would like to acknowledge all the women who are tirelessly supporting the peace building efforts in Bangsamoro and building Bangsamoro, not just the leaders, but also the grassroots movements and women from all walks of life, from all sectors. This is a good opportunity since Bangsamoro is on the first year of it being established. So that's it for my research. I hope that if you have questions, feel free to add your comments after this video. Here are some of the reference that I have used for this research. Thank you and stay safe. Have a wonderful afternoon.